I welcome you on behalf of the Community Senior Center. And I want to acknowledge Diane Reynolds, who's here somewhere. She's the one who talked to Cindy and had the idea of inviting Cindy and made this all possible. So Cindy Sprague is a self-employed consulting hydrogeologist with Sprague Geoscience. She began taking courses in herpetology in 2012 at UVM and then became a teacher's assistant for those courses. She's the former co-chair of the Huntington Conservation Commission and helped grow their salamander crossing volunteer program. And every spring, she just can't wait for warm, rainy nights so she can experience her favorite sign of spring, which is frogs and salamanders crossing the roads and heading to their breeding pools. So with great pleasure, I introduce Cynthia Sprague.
Great. Well, thank you very much. So as Jane said, I'm a consulting hydrogeologist, been doing that for many decades. But I took up an interest in herpetology, which is the study of reptiles and amphibians, after I went to a presentation at the Richmond Library on salamanders. And I was like, well, I got to learn more about this. And that's when I started taking all those classes. So it's been really fun. Let's see, I'm also I'm doing a citizen science project. We're monitoring a vernal pool in Huntington. It's for the Vermont Center for Eco Studies. So that's been a really fun project too. That's been going on at least 3 years now. And the other thing I'm doing with regard to herpetology is I'm tracking rat snakes in Addison County. So I'm working with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department to try to identify their denning areas. So that's been a really fun way to be involved as well. So, but today we're going back to amphibians, and I just want to tell you guys a little bit about what's going on. It's, we're anticipating that these amphibians might be moving this Friday night with the forecast of rain and warmish weather. So here's what you're going to see. So I'm going to talk about why, when, and where the amphibians are crossing, and some sample locations in the Tri-Town area. And I have also one location in Shelburne I'm going to show you. A lot of it's going to be on species identification. So I'll show you lots of good pictures and tell you how to identify which ones you're finding out there. Just a few tips. If you do decide to go out and look for amphibians, some things you're going to want to know. And then there's a few programs that I'll just briefly talk about through Northridge Nature Center that, if you really get into this, you might want to get involved in their program. And then what we're doing in the Huntington Conservation Commission in our town for getting volunteers out there. That's one that Diane's involved with. And then some resources if you want to explore this further. And if we have time at the end, I'll play some frog calls and take questions, of course. So amphibian, you probably learned this in grade school, but just a review, it means to live a double life. And so most of them have the gill breathing larval stage, and most of them also go to a terrestrial lung breathing adult, but not all. And in Vermont, it includes the salamanders and frogs, which frogs also include toads. And so this is going to give us some idea, given their lifestyle, of why we might find them crossing the roads. So why do they cross the roads? The short answer is to mate. They're looking to breed, and they need to move from their upland overwintering habitat to their wetland breeding habitat. And they also cross the roads to get back up to their upland area, after they're done breeding. And then also the young will go back up in the fall. And as we know, we build our roads along rivers and waterways. And so often these two habitats are bisected by these roads. So when do they cross the roads? It's in the spring. It's right now when the wetlands are starting to thaw out, and hopefully they've thawed completely. Uplands are thawing out too. You want to go out at night. They pretty much only move at night. And it has to be when the roads are wet and temperatures are warm. Warm is a relative term. 40 degrees is good. They can migrate at lower temps, but you won't see as many species, and not as many will be out. Wood frogs are kind of the exception. They can move during the day. If all these other conditions are met, they're just very anxious to get to their pools. And you can continue to see them throughout the summer. It's just going to be different species that you're going to find. And as I mentioned, there's fall migration when the young of the year move back upland. So here's a few crossing sites that we know of that are pretty productive. One are moving to the wetlands in this area, not to the pond itself. And I have show you the upland areas with this topographic map. And I put a layer on of Vermont significant wetland inventory layer. So these are all like class 2 wetlands here, shown in this greenish color. And so the amphibians are moving here off the wooded hillside across the road and into these wetlands. And I monitor this crossing often. I've done it for years and years, and these are some of the species that I've found. The most common ones that you're going to see is spotted salamander, wood frog, and spring peeper. Those are sort of the primary ones that migrate and that you're going to see out there. Later on in the season, you'll run into the toads. Eastern redbacks are just super common, so you'll see those, and pickerel frog. So this is what it looks like. I took a photo recently, and it's just this vast wetland here. The pond is over here, Gillette Pond, and here's the road that they have to cross. So I tried to do one for each town. So the one in Richmond I chose was on Cochrane Road. It's right adjacent to the ski area. And they're going down into these wetlands that are associated with the Winooski River, but it's not the Winooski River they're going to, it's these wetlands. And I've done the same map for this. So they're migrating down here, and this green area are those wetlands. Here's a picture I took a couple days ago, and you can still see there's ice on that, but so long as there's melting around the edges and some open water, they'll move if the other conditions are right. Here's Stage Road in Bolton. I'm not as familiar with this site, but I just wanted to include it to have to let people from Bolton area know where these are. So this is the area here, and same thing, this upland habitat and the wetland here. These are some species. I haven't been there, but these are the ones that have been reported from other people. And I wanted to include the Shelburne Pond one because sometimes species will move earlier, and there's different species that are going to occur in this lowland habitat versus we're more near the mountains, and so there's different species. So, for instance, the northern leopard frog, we might have them up in our towns, but they're not very common. They're more of a lowland species. So this is a good crossing to go to early, before things might be moving in our tri-town area. We can find species moving down here. Here's the same map. So upland area, not as much upland, but some upland, and then this big wetland area on the south side of Shelburne Pond. So now we'll get into the species you might see. There's 3 species that you could see. 2 of them are not very common, but I just want to include them in case you do get lucky and find them. And then I've also included 3 common or fairly common species that are not really migrating, but they could be out there. So this is sort of the rock star of amphibian migration, is the spotted salamander. There's nothing that really looks like this. It's dark colored with these bright yellow spots going down the back and on their head. And this is one of the mole salamanders. And they're called mole salamanders because when they're not migrating to their lowland wetland area, they're using mammal burrows to live in and to forage in and to hide, and to stay moist. So they rely on those mammal tunnels. I've shown a state map of Vermont that shows where the species has been reported. And all the areas that are dark are towns. So it's all by town, the towns that they've been reported. And I've also given the state rank, and S5 is the most common. So it starts with S1, which is very, very rare. And then S5 is the most common species. So it's very common, but you don't see it very often because they're so good at hiding. So it's a great time, this time of year, to get out and you'll see lots of them if you hit it right. So this is one I found a while ago, and I had my field book with me. So you can see that this field book is 7 inches long. So these can get to be, 8 or even 9 inches in length. So they're our biggest salamander. Here's a picture of the males arrive first and to the pools. So this is a group of males. They call them congresses of males. And they're just sort of waiting around for the females to show up and just getting ready for them. I'm going to show you how to differentiate, to sex the species. For spotted salamanders, if you find one, the males have a really swollen vent and the females do not. So that's the best way to tell those apart. The males will deposit these spermatophores, which are sort of like a little jelly thing with some sperm on top. And they deposit them at the bottom of the vernal pool, or any pool, attached to leaf litter. And then they will try to attract the females to come and pick up this sperm packet with its cloaca. So they do this little dance and try to show the females where their spermatophore is and get them to fertilize themselves. So this is what a spotted salamander egg mass looks like. There's usually like 100, maybe 200 eggs within each mass, and it has this jelly coating around the whole thing, and it's pretty firm. It's like set jelly, so you can pick it up with your hand and it'll stay in one piece. Here's the larvae. They have external gills, so they're breathing through their gills. So the next mole salamander, which is much more rare. This is blue spotted salamander, and these are quite a bit smaller than the spotted. They have blue flecks with this dark background color. These guys, you can see by this map, they're mostly found like in the Champlain Valley, down here in the southeast part of the state. And so they're more of a lowland species. And here's our tri-town area of Huntington, Richmond, and Bolton. So they're found, they're not found in Bolton yet, but we do have them up here in the other 2 towns. But they're a state rank of S3, so that's pretty uncommon. They're a species of special concern and also a medium rank of greatest conservation needs. So much less likely to see them. The third mole salamander is a Jefferson salamander. These guys are very large, probably almost as big as the spotted, and kind of not have many characteristics. But they've got, as far as color goes, but they've got really long toes, and they've got a very long tail compared to their body. These guys migrate really early. The vernal pool that I'm monitoring, I've set traps out for them, and they just come. They're the first ones to arrive, and way before the spotted salamanders get there. They're a state rank of S2, so even less common than the blue spotted. And so, but you can see they're found a little bit higher up. They're not necessarily in the real lowlands, but they're, kind of in between, like the high peaks. You won't find them there, but you'll sort of find them in this intermediate area. This is what their egg mass looks like. So quite a bit smaller and fewer eggs than the spotted, but always surrounded again by that other layer of jelly around the whole mass. And they're kind of runny. If you try to pick them up, they're kind of ooze through your fingers. So that's another way to tell them from a spotted. So here's a picture of both the Jefferson and blue spotted together. You can see the Jefferson's quite a bit bigger, and here's the blue spotted smaller. These guys in the past have hybridized, and so oftentimes you'll find an individual that looks like has features of both of these, sort of intermediate size, maybe some flecking, more flecking on this than the Jefferson does. And those they call the blue spotted Jefferson group because you can't really differentiate, which ones they are. So they're a hybrid. So you might see those out there as well. You'll probably see more of those than the actual unique Jefferson or blue spotted. Eastern newts. So these guys are not migrating, but they're just super common, and they love like beaver ponds, and there's just a lot of them around, and so you'll probably see these crossing the roads as well. The aquatic adult is greenish. It says this beautiful yellow belly with black spots, and they both stages. This is the terrestrial stage, a juvenile, and they also have these red spots with black rings around them. Here's a couple adults, getting ready to mate. You can tell the males from the females because they have this much wider tail fin. And they also have some other, they have a ways to grasp onto the female. So they have little black scratchy areas on their hind legs. Here's another picture of the belly. So you're going to find some dead salamanders out there. And so it's a good identification tool to look at this belly with the black spots. These guys are big predators of wood frog eggs. This is from my pond out back. And these guys are always hanging out right next to the wood frog egg masses, and you see them eating the eggs all the time. This is typical habitat for the eastern newt, the aquatic stage of it. So another really common salamander, again, state reg S5, found throughout Vermont pretty much, is this redback salamander, eastern redback. This is the most common form that you'll see, with this brick red back and sort of gray sides. This one has regrown its tail. A lot of salamanders can lose their tail and then they can regrow them, but they always look a little bit different than the original tail. There's different forms of the eastern redback. This is the most common. You can see this leadback stage where it's all this sort of gray color. And this other all red form is much less common. A good way if you find a salamander, I always recommend turning it over if you can't identify it and looking at its belly. And that's going to be one more clue to figure out what you're seeing. These guys have sort of modeled a mix of gray, dark gray and tannish color, sort of this mottled vermiculated belly. Another common species, again, a state rank of S5 and found throughout the state, is the northern two-line salamander. This one is more of they call it a stream salamander or a saturated soil salamander. It has two dark lines along the side with a kind of yellowish or tannish base color. And if you flip that over, the underside, especially the tail, is yellow. But these guys wander a little bit from the stream, so that's why you'll see them on the roads. So that was the salamanders. So some of the frogs you're going to see, the main frogs you're going to see are wood frogs and spring peepers. These guys are also migrating, and so they're very common as well. And then some of the later breeders, the toad, American toad, and these other ones, you'll see if you continue to monitor these sites a little bit later into the season. Here's a cool graph of their mating or their calling times. These are all reported to the Vermont Reptile and Amphibian Atlas. So this is for the whole state of Vermont. We where we are, we'll probably be somewhere in this, middle range of where they've been reported. They're going to start calling a little earlier in the Champlain Valley, and they'll call a little bit later, probably up in the Northeast Kingdom. But we're probably in this middle zone somewhere. So you can see spring peepers have a really long calling period. They get a lot of reports of spring peepers. They're everywhere. Here's a wood frog, the other species we're going to see. They call much earlier, as you can tell, and then they stop later. Green frogs are a summer breeder, so they're calling later and they peak later. Toads are kind of in the middle. And here's a few other frogs. The northern leopard frog is more of a more of a lowland frog, so they call early. Pickerel frogs we have in our area, they're kind of mid-season, and bullfrogs are later. So here's the wood frog. These guys are usually super common, as I mentioned, but you don't see them. They're common, but if you walk around, they're so well hidden and cryptic. Unless they move, you just won't see them. They blend right into the leaf litter, and so this is a great time to get out and actually see quite a few of them. Let me go back, I'm sorry. They had this, to identify them, they had this black mask that starts behind the eye and goes all the way down here to the end of the jaw. And they had these two lines down their back, which are called dorsolateral ridges. And that's a great identifying feature because the spring peepers don't have that. So that's a really good way to identify them. You can also, the way you sex them is the females are bigger and they're carrying eggs, and they're lighter colored. They can be sort of salmon colored. The males are usually darker and they're not as big. Here's a photo of some wood frogs that I was crossing, picking up and crossing and putting them on the other side of the road. And when I was done, I looked over and went, wow, look at the variation in color. This is all from one spot on one night. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. Wood frogs, if you can find this one in the photo, it's right here. They're freeze tolerant. They're one of our 4 species of frogs that are freeze tolerant. So they can freeze solid. They stop breathing and their heart stops. I mean, they're still alive, but all of that stops for the winter time. They have glucose, which acts as an antifreeze. And so even though they look like they're frozen solid, the cells themselves, inside the cells is not frozen, but it's everything, all the fluid around the cells are frozen. But anyway, so they overwinter in the leaf litter, just dig down the leaf litter. And when they start to feel that things are thawing, they will thaw out and start up to head right to the vernal pool. So they're one of our early crossers too. Here's a picture of them in amplexus. It's the position that they call the frogs when they're mating. And they're here among all these wood frog egg masses. They end up being about the size of a softball each mass, but the females will tend to lay their eggs together in the same portion of the pool. So it can end up being this big mat of wood frog eggs. Quick picture of what the tadpoles look like. And then here's a picture. It's fun to be able to identify the spotted salamander egg masses and the wood frog egg masses, because you'll oftentimes see these together in the same pool. So the wood frog egg masses are larger, they have a lot more eggs in them, and they look really bumpy. You can see each individual egg, whereas the spotted salamanders has that layer of jelly around it. They're much smaller, the egg masses are smaller, there's less eggs in them, but it's really looking for that jelly layer around them. So a spring peeper, as their scientific name suggests, crucifer means cross. So they have a cross on their back, a dark colored cross on their back, which is a great identifying feature. And they do not have dorsolateral ridges. It's a smooth back. They're in the chorus frog family, so they're pretty good climbers. they're not true tree frogs, but they're pretty good climbers. And they have little toe pads, so you'll notice that as well. Very common in Vermont, stingrag S5. Here's a few more pictures of them. There's one calling, and just another one, just, again, how cryptic they can be. These are their calling times. So to sex the peepers, the males have this dark throat, and the females don't. Here's one of a picture, just so you can get the relative size comparison between the much larger wood frog and the tiny little spring peeper. These guys are just so easy to miss if you're out walking or driving. You really have to look hard to find them. Okay, the American toad, again, super common. You will find these way other times of the year, but they're still fun to find early on during spring migration. They are very colorful. The females especially are more colorful, a little bit bigger. Toads have a sort of a drier skin and warty. They're much rougher looking. They're poisonous, so they can secrete poison, and so they're not as good of hoppers as the true frogs, and they move pretty slowly, but they don't really need to move because predators find out pretty quickly that they're not good eating. So if you flip these over, their belly's white with spots on it, and they have this capillary patch here. And this is an area that they absorb water through. So you'll see them out, sometimes like last summer when it was so dry, I put out these little containers of water, shallow containers of water. And I would go out and check them at night. And I'd almost always find a toad just sitting in there absorbing water to keep itself moist. So here's a toadlet. They're really tiny, but they still have some of they're already getting warty, and they're just very cool. The eggs are these long strings, double strings, and they're kind of coiled like the old style telephone cords. And that's what the tadpoles look like. They also often travel in just like huge groups. They all stay together in the pond. Okay, green frogs, another common frog. I'm sure everyone's familiar with these. It's the most common frog in Vermont. They also have dorsolateral ridges like the wood frog. They're a green. They're not always even though they're called a green frog. You really want to think of them as a green-faced frog because the color can really vary a lot. Here's a female, and her tympanum, which is their eardrum, is about the same size as the eye. And then the male, which I'll show you later, the tympanum is much bigger than the eye, and they have a bright yellow throat. Since they're later breeders, they end up depositing their eggs in permanent ponds, and it's just this big sheet, a layer of eggs that are just sort of on the surface of the pond. So again, here's the male with the big tympanum compared to the eye, and the female that's pretty close, pretty much the same size. And you can see part of his yellow throat here. The gray tree frog is another one, breeds a little bit later, but you'll hear them calling from, they are a true tree frog, excuse me, and they're great climbers. They're going to be high up in the trees, and you can hear them calling on those warm summer nights, just calling from the trees. They have a short trill call, and they're found pretty much everywhere except for not in the really high elevation towns. But they're still given a state rank of S5, which is common. So they're very lichenate colored. The color can vary, but they're real camouflage with sort of these different color patterns on them. They're kind of rough. Some people think they're toads, but they're not. They're frogs with moist skin, and they also have this yellow underneath their groin, which is a good characteristic, and a light patch under the eye. Here's a close-up of one calling. Again, that light patch really shows up really well. And you can see how this is much different color than the one in the previous slide. And you can really get a good idea of the texture of the skin. These guys have sort of loose egg masses, pretty small, just a few, not too many eggs in each mass. And their tadpoles are just incredibly beautiful with this really beautiful bright red tail. This is what the juvenile looks like, bright emerald green. I mean, it's such a great frog. I hope you guys are able to find some of these. Pickerel frogs. S5 again, so common. Not found in the lowlands. There's a similar spotted frog called the northern leopard frog, which I'll talk about later, but that's more of the lowland species, but there is some their ranges overlap. So we can, in our towns, we can find both the pickerel frog and the northern leopard frog, but this is the most common in our towns, because it's more of an upland species. So they have a more sort of squarish or rectangular, even rows of rectangular spots on them. And again, yellow underneath the groin is a good way to tell these from the northern leopard frog, and dorsolateral ridges as well. Here's another. The background color can vary a little bit, but this is, it's always a tan or a light gray color. And with the yellow groin. This is what their egg masses look like. They're also a little bit yellow, gold color, and pretty tight egg mass. So here's a northern leopard frog. So that's the lower, that's a little less common, this S4, mostly in the Champlain Valley in the lowland areas. More of a pale white belly and rounder spots that have halos around them. But they can have two base colors. One's more of a gray, similar to the pickerel frog, but the other one's green. So if you find the green, you know you've got a leopard frog. But if you find a gray one, you're going to have to figure out which one you've got, if it's pickerel frog or northern leopard frog. That's what their egg mass looks like, similar to the pickerel frog, but black. Here's a photo by Sue Morse. You probably might have heard of her, the big tracker. She, from Keeping Track. So we have this green one, so we know that's a northern leopard frog. And so we're trying to figure out between these two, which one's northern leopard and which one's pickerel frog. You can see these light halos around this one, and they're more rounder, more scattered, not as well organized spots. So that one's also a northern leopard frog. And here's the pickerel frog with the two rows of darker spots, more squarish. So the Vermont Reptile Amphibian Atlas, also called the HERP Atlas, is always looking for records of the northern leopard frog from these two towns. So if you guys are out there and find them, they would appreciate that. And I'll give you information at the end of this slideshow about how to contact them. Bullfrogs, you guys, hopefully you've heard bullfrogs calling. They're sort of, they're just a great, it's a great call to hear. Juggerum. They're also more of a, they're not found in these higher elevation towns either, but they're pretty common again, S5. Similar to the green frog, they have, if the tympanum is larger than the eye, then it's a male. And also the males have a yellow throat. So here's the male, here's the female. So it's very similar to the green frog as far as identification, as far as sexing them. Bullfrogs don't have that dorsolateral ridge, and they're bigger than green frogs. But so the main thing you want to look for is no dorsolateral ridge. It has this ridge that comes from the eye and around the tympanum, but it doesn't go down the back. So here's the green frog with the dorsolateral ridge, and here's the bullfrog with this, it just going around the tympanum, a little fold. And so another example, these are both females because they're just, you can tell by the size of the tympanum and the whiter throats. This species, four-toed salamander, is not found in our three-town area. They're really a lowland species, but the state's really looking for more. They think they're maybe underreported because they're so small, and people just might not know what they are. And so I just want to get the word out that if you do happen to see one of these guys, you'll want to report it to the Herp Atlas. It's an S2, so it's very rare. And again, the species of concern with a medium conservation need. These guys are pretty cool because they have this sort of indentation at the base of the tail. So it is designed to separate. If there's a predator coming after it, it will hopefully grab at the tail, and then this guy can crawl away while this tail is wiggling and the predator is being distracted by the tail. So it's a great defense mechanism for them. But to identify them, they're kind of a reddish, orangish down the back with gray sides. They're called the four-toed salamander. Most salamanders have four toes in the front and 5 in the back. But these only have 4 toes on their rear legs. So that's where their name came from. It's not a great identifier because these are so small and it's really hard to see the toes. So the best way to identify them is by their belly. And they're just this like bright white, glossy white with black specks, around 20% specks and 80% white. And nothing else has this belly color. So if you get this small salamander, you're not sure what it is, flip it over. If it looks like this, report it to the atlas. So that's all the species. And then I'm going to get into some of the logistics of what you'll need to bring with you if you decide that you're interested in this and you want to go out and help amphibians across the road and experience them for yourself. So of course you're going out after dark, so you want to bring a bright flashlight, the best flashlight you can get. I like to bring a headlamp, or sometimes I bring both, and you want to have a backup just in case one dies on you, either batteries or a backup backup headlamp. It's usually wet, not always raining, but it's wet out there. So rain gear, rubber boots, reflective clothing is really important because cars are going to be going by and they're not necessarily looking for you out there. I like to bring my smartphone so I can take pictures and also I can identify where I am once I got those pictures. I bring a waterproof field book and pencil so I can document what I'm seeing. Some people like to bring a container to put the herps in if you want to show them to some of your partners, or just if there's a lot of them out there, you might want to plunk them in a container and move them over that way, or whatever reason. People like to have that sometime. And you can put like warning signs out on your car, just letting people know that you're out there searching. All right, so you want to make sure if you're going to your crossing site, you need to be aware that there could be amphibians out crossing other roads on your way to your site. So you want to make sure you're driving slowly and really looking out for them, and try to stay on the main roads because there's going to be more species crossing on the smaller roads where they're not getting killed at such a high rate. So it's best to choose a crossing location close to your home. You want to get out and walk your crossing. Don't try to do your survey in your car. It's a bad idea. I like to have another person with me. You can do it by yourself, but it's more fun with 2, and you can cover the ground carefully by each one sort of checking out one lane. You got to really look slowly. It's not just going out for a walk with your friend and chatting. You really need to be looking carefully at the ground because those spring peepers are really tiny. The most important thing, which is why I've highlighted it, is because you want to move the amphibians the direction they're going, because you know that sometimes they're going to be moving towards the wetlands, sometimes they're heading back into the uplands. So you just want to make sure they know where they're going and just move them the direction they're going, even if it doesn't make sense to you. You really want your hands to be clean because they absorb things through their skin. So you absolutely have to have clean hands. Wet hands are good because you don't want them to dry out. You don't want to drop the amphibians, so make sure you hold them, securely. I like to hold them around the belly. Frogs will tend to, if you just put them in your hand, the frog might jump out. Salamanders can wiggle, so that's a good secure grip around the belly. If you feel like they're getting tacky, if you pick them up and they're kind of sticky or tacky, you could sprinkle a little bit of water from a nearby puddle, or at least move them, and then make sure you're putting them in a really damp area on the other side of the road. Only handle them as much as you have to, and really look out for your safety, because I mentioned just cars are going by and they're not necessarily thinking about people out on the road. So I've showed you a few crossing sites that are well-known sites that I know about and others know about. But how do you find one in your area? Ways to do that are just look for the criteria that I explained at the beginning of just uplands on one side of the road and wetlands on the other side. And you very well might have you might discover your own crossing area. You can listen for frogs once they start calling, and then you'll know, okay, they must, if there's a road, if you're on the road, you'll know that they somehow must have gotten over there. And so that's another way to find potential sites. And then the North Branch Nature Center, which is in Montpelier, they've got a great website now that shows known or areas that they think are going to be good crossing areas. And you can check out this link, and I'll show you. Once you check out that link, this is what will show up. There's a map of crossing areas, and they're just dots. And then you click on the dot, and it'll show you where the crossing area is and what species have been found there. So here's the Gillette Pond crossing area. The Shelburne Pond crossing area. This is the Cochran's area. Here's the one in Bolton, Stage Road, and then this is the Gillette Pond one. So you can see there's a lot of other potential crossing areas around. For this map, the green ones are known crossing areas where they have a lot of data. The yellow ones, they have a little bit of data on them, so they know they're crossing areas, but they're trying to get more information. And the red ones have not been surveyed to their knowledge. And so they're looking for people to survey these areas and determine if they are a crossing area or not. Okay, so there's a couple ways, a couple things that people and governments are doing to reduce amphibian mortality during this migration period. And road crossing volunteers is one thing that I'm working with the town of Huntington on. And as, the North Branch Nature Center, by putting together this map, they have a whole group of volunteers that are doing their program. So they're trying to get people to help with that as well. Another way is to install a road underpass where the amphibians can cross under the road. And then some towns opt to close certain roads during amphibian migration. So the North Branch Nature Center that I was mentioning, they show where potential road crossings are, and they want people to go out and do those crossings, monitor those crossings, and then collect data for them. And so I'm just going to briefly tell you what they're looking for. They have a site code, so you want to record that, number of people in your party that are doing the survey, and the temperature. You only had to put one person's name down in the email. So you want to write down the date, start and end time of each survey that you're doing. You're going to do each survey. If you choose to participate in this program, you'll do every time you go one way during your crossings location, that's a survey. And then you would start a new data sheet if you're going to go the other direction. You want to note the road conditions, how wet it is, if it's actually raining or if the roads are just wet, and the number of passing cars. They're trying to correlate like how many correlate the number of dead and alive based on the number of cars that are passing by in any particular time. There could be other people out surveying that are not in your party, so you want to count the number of them as well. And then they want you to identify the number of dead and live individuals for each species. And then you're going to go back and enter all that data on their online form. So here's what the data sheet looks like. So I just wanted to introduce it to you briefly, but they have a full training program on their website with training videos, and they get you really up to speed with their program and what they want you to do. So in Huntington, we've started a new program this year called Adopter Crossing Program. So that's sort of our solution to how we can help reduce mortality. We've got these amphibian crossing signs that are up at our known crossing areas. And we've asked people to sign up. We have groups of people signing up for each of the crossing areas. And they put these signs up and down. Put them down at the beginning of the season, and then at the end of the season we'll close them up so people don't get too used to seeing those and ignoring them. So we're trying it out for the first time. We'll see how it works. I'm really excited about it, and I hope we have some good collect some good data and save a lot of salamanders and frogs this year. So the main goal of our program is to just reduce amphibian mortality. We want to educate people about the importance of our amphibians and just get people outside. We do want to know what's out there, but we're really, the main goal here, at least for this year, is the mortality. So we provided this crossing map to everybody who volunteered, and between each arrows is a crossing area. So they know where to go. This is where the signs are put up. And so it's pretty well organized, I think. So the other way is if you have a lot of money and if you have an area that has a lot of different species and a lot of individuals crossing, it's just not going to work to continue to just try to get volunteers out there. It's just going to be overwhelming. So in that case, if you can get the funds together, building an underpass is a really good solution. These underpasses, they're engineered, designed. They have grates in the top of the road so that precipitation can get down in underneath the tunnel and keep it cold, keep it wet. And they have these little walls coming out that sort of lead the amphibians into the tunnel opening. This is one on Moncton Road. It's a very busy road, and there's just a lot of diversity in this area. And so they were able to work with Fish and Wildlife, some conservation commissions, were able to raise the money and build 2 of these crossings. So they've just been a huge success with 2,200 amphibians crossing that were recorded in this tunnel after they installed cameras on it and figured that out. So it's pretty cool. And as I mentioned, another way is to just close the road. So they're not closed the whole time, but the big nights, they just close the road and people have to find alternative ways around these sites. So here's some resources I put together for you. The North Branch Nature Center, which I've been talking about, training videos, maps, they've got just a lot of information there. The Vermont Herp Atlas is where you would report any of your species that you find. They're looking for any reports of all the species, but they're particularly interested in those that are more rare. So the S1s, 2s, and 3s. And they have a lot of great information on species identification. If you want to find out more about some of the ones I've introduced you to, they'll have a lot of information about them as well. This is a great site for frog calls. If you want to practice your frog calls, they have you can go on there and go to the frog call, look up, put in your state, and they'll list all the frogs that are here in Vermont, and then they'll have recordings of the individual frogs. And then there's a quiz you can take where there'll be multiple frogs calling at once, and you can see if you can like tease out who's there. So this is my final slide. And so I was going to have, looks like I have time to do this. I was going to show a couple frog calls, play a couple frog calls, and then show you a quick video of salamanders going underneath that tunnel. And then we'll have some time for questions. Does that sound good? Okay. So, let's see here. So the most common chorus you're going to hear early on is this. So the peepers, you can hear the peepers, they have this little peep, and they're really loud. And then the wood frogs are more like the quack of a duck. So I'm just going to play it one more time so you can listen, but it's like they're both of them are just in full-on chorus at this point. And those were wood frogs swimming around in the video. The video's not great because it's so dark, but I thought that you'd appreciate the calls. And so later on in the season, this is a great tree frog calling, and you're going to hear peepers in the background. They have this trill, sort of sounds like maybe you're running your thumb over a comb, but they'll do it better. I'll show you the real one. Okay, and then, well, here we go. And then here's an American toad. You guys have probably all heard this, but I think it's a great one. It's this long musical trill. They can go on for like 30 seconds. So that was just one toad. Oftentimes you'll hear them calling back and forth. Anyway, so there's the frog calls. And then let's see here. Here's the Moncton underpass that I just showed you a picture of. And here's 1 hour of crossing where they took a picture every minute for an hour. And so you'll just see just a lot of little specks just moving along, crossing under this. Okay. Oops. So anyway, that's the presentation. We have time for a few questions if anyone has anything for me.
I have several.
Okay, good.
Flashlights. You said to use a good flashlight, a bright flashlight. Is there such a thing as too bright of a flashlight that causes
I don't
them
think
to
so. I don't think so. And also it's good. I put in the lithium batteries. They'll last longer in the cooler weather. So this, if you really want to get into it, that would be a good idea.
And you mentioned toads are poisonous to whom?
Poisonous, like if you've ever seen a dog pick up a toad and start chewing on it, it'll start foaming at the mouth, and they're poisonous to lots of things. They have a parotoid gland, which is that let me see if I can find it real quickly here. That's where the poison comes out of. So if, Oh, okay, I was going the wrong way. Okay, so, yeah, so it comes out of their parotid gland, and it's just poisonous to a lot of things. That's why they can be so slow. Like, there's not many predators. I mean, there's always predators that get around that. There are always exceptions, but there's a lot of things that it will protect itself from.
My granddaughter loves to pick up toads and frogs, plays with them every day.
Yeah. So there's one I forgot to mention too, that if you pick up a male frog and just like hold it, pretty securely by the belly, by the side, on the side, it'll vibrate and give this release call. It's just telling you, like, I'm a male, I don't want to mate with you. Thanks anyway. So that's a good way to tell them, other than the size difference that I mentioned. Picking it up and getting that release call, only the males do that.
Now, are you interested in different times of the year also, if we see some of these frogs or toads?
Absolutely. So I'm interested in seeing them all the time. I mean, the toads you can see they have a long call period, and they're mating for at different areas for a long season. But yeah, so I'm interested. You could report to me, but the Vermont Herp Atlas, which I have at the end here, they even if you just Google Vermont Herp Atlas, but right there, vtherpatlas.org. That's where you really want to do any of your reptile and amphibian sightings. They like to know about that.
Okay, 2 last questions. Number 1 for Jane, is this being recorded? Can we see this later?
Yes, it's being recorded.
Great, super. Abby's going to love this. And lastly, did raccoons pick up on the bypass in Moncton?
Okay, yes, there's a lot of other species that use that as well, and raccoons included. But I know sometimes when all of these amphibians are together, some of the predators will take advantage of that.
Yeah,
and
right.
And just wait for them to come through. But as far as the number that we lose that way, it just doesn't compare to how many would have gotten killed by all the traffic. Another thing you're going to see as far as predators, sometimes you'll see barred owls out at night when they're crossing, because they're looking for a snack also.
Thank you.
And skunks, lots of things are predators. A lot of things eat amphibians. Raccoon. Is that it for questions? Okay, well, you guys are super smart and got everything. And the timing is just about perfect, right, Jane?
Right? Perfect. I think you explained everything so well.
Okay, well, if anyone has any, if you think of anything later on, feel free to contact me. I think, Jane, you have my contact info, or I can give it to you guys right now. How do you do that?
You can put it up now if you can.
Can you guys see my notes? Okay. Okay, here we go. Okay. So it's just Cindy S at madriver.com. So pretty easy. Yeah. So if you go out, or if you don't, and you see and you take a picture and you see something you don't know how to identify, please email me a picture and I will try to identify it for you. Okay, well, thank you for attending. I know it's a beautiful day, especially for March, and so I appreciate you guys watching this or participating in the middle of the day like this. It's been really fun.
Thank you so much for doing this, Cindy. It was great.
Okay, so long.
Thank you, Cindy.
You're welcome. Thank you.